Your grandparents' garden was a treasure trove of flavors, packed with vegetables so unique and hearty that they thrived for generations. Yet today, many of them have vanished from supermarket shelves. So what happened to these once beloved crops? Let's dig into 25 forgotten vegetables that deserve a comeback. Long before fast food and frozen dinners, families turned to the soil for sustenance, cultivating hardy, nutrient-rich crops that could withstand tough conditions. Among them was a root vegetable that carried an unusual nickname, the oyster plant. Despite having no connection to seafood, this unassuming vegetable was prized for its delicate, slightly briny flavor that, when cooked, bore a striking resemblance to oysters. Salsify was a staple in many American gardens, especially in regions where fresh seafood was a luxury. It thrived in poor soil, was easy to store through winter, and could be prepared in multiple ways. Whether boiled, mashed, or fried, it was a reliable substitute for pricier ingredients. Cooks often treated it like parsnips, simmering it in cream or adding it to soups. Some even battered and fried it, creating a dish that tasted far fancier than its humble roots. But over time, salsify fell victim to changing diets and modern convenience. It required patience. Digging up the long, slender roots was tedious, and peeling them was even worse. Grocery stores replaced it with more familiar, easier-to-sell vegetables, and soon the oyster plant faded into obscurity. In a time when every inch of the garden had to earn its keep, people relied on crops that were hardy, nutritious, and versatile. That's where scorzonera, a lesser-known cousin of salsify, came in. Often called black salsify because of its dark brown skin, it wasn't the most attractive vegetable, but it made up for that with its mild, nutty flavor and impressive resilience. While other plants wilted under harsh conditions, scorzonera thrived, even in poor soil and cold temperatures. Packed with fiber, vitamins, and minerals, it was known to aid digestion and was even considered a natural remedy for ailments like inflammation and fatigue. Unlike some root vegetables that became woody over time, scorzonera stayed tender, making it a reliable choice for soups, stews, and side dishes. Cooks often boiled it, sautéed it in butter, or creamed it for a dish reminiscent of asparagus. In some regions, the young leaves and shoots were eaten as well, making it a two-in-one crop. So why did scorzonera fade from American tables? Convenience. Peeling its thin, sticky skin was time-consuming, and as supermarkets pushed for picture-perfect vegetables, this unassuming root was left behind. Tucked beneath paper-thin husks, these tiny golden fruits were once a garden favorite, treasured for their sweet tropical flavor. Ground cherries, despite their name, aren't cherries at all. They're closer to tomatillos, sharing the same lantern-like husk, but their taste is something else entirely, a mix of pineapple, mango, and citrus, with just a hint of vanilla. Generations ago, they were a staple in backyard gardens across America, particularly in the Midwest and Appalachia. Hardy and low maintenance, they practically planted themselves, falling to the ground when ripe and sprouting new plants the following season. Kids would pluck them straight from the vine for a snack, while homemakers turned them into jams, preserves, and pies. Some even used them in chutneys and salsas, their sweet tart flavor pairing perfectly with savory dishes. But as commercial farming favored crops with longer shelf lives, ground cherries all but disappeared from grocery stores. Their delicate husks and short storage time made them difficult to mass produce, and without widespread availability, they gradually faded from American kitchens. Today, they remain a rare find outside farmers markets and home gardens. Long before grocery stores made vegetables look uniform and effortless, some plants demanded patience. Cardoon, a striking relative of the artichoke, was one of them. Towering in the garden with its silvery green leaves, it resembled a thistle. But unlike artichokes, its prize wasn't in the flower. It was in the stalks. Thick, ribbed, and slightly bitter, cardoon had to be blanched for weeks before harvest to soften its texture and mellow its flavor. Once prepared, however, it was a delicacy. Italian and French immigrants brought their love for cardoon to America, using it in gratins, soups, and stews. Many families dipped the stalks in batter and fried them. a rustic old-world dish reminiscent of fried celery. When slow-cooked, cardoon developed a tender artichoke-like richness, pairing beautifully with butter, cream, and cheese. Despite its deep culinary roots, cardoon never became a household staple in the U.S. It required space, time, and a cook willing to wrestle with its tough outer fibers. As convenience foods took over, cardoon faded from home gardens, surviving only in niche farming circles. For centuries, before the potato took center stage in kitchens across the world, another root vegetable quietly dominated the dinner table. Skirret, a sweet, multi-rooted plant, was once a favorite among European settlers and early American farmers. Unlike the starchy single-tuber potato, skirret produced clusters of thin, white roots packed with natural sugars and a subtle nutty flavor. Highly valued for its cold tolerance, skirret thrived in poor soil and survived harsh winters when other crops failed. Cooks found endless ways to use it. Boiled, roasted, or mashed, it was a versatile ingredient that paired well with butter and spices. Some families even treated it like a parsnip, adding it to stews, while others blended it into fritters or pies for a naturally sweet bite. So why did this once beloved vegetable disappear? The answer is simple: efficiency. Skirret, with its delicate interwoven roots, was far trickier to harvest and clean than a bulky potato. When large-scale farming favored high-yield crops, skirret was quietly replaced. Today, it's nearly forgotten outside heirloom gardening circles, but for those who rediscover it, the reward is undeniable. Not an artichoke, not from Jerusalem. Jerusalem artichokes or sunchokes have one of the most misleading names in the vegetable world. This knobby, unassuming tuber comes from a species of sunflower native to North America, and for centuries, it was a vital food source for indigenous tribes and early settlers. With a crisp texture when raw and a nutty, slightly sweet flavor when cooked, it was a versatile ingredient that required almost no effort to grow. Unlike potatoes, which needed replanting each season, sunchokes spread aggressively underground, coming back year after year. They could be roasted, boiled, or mashed into soups, and because they contained inulin instead of starch, they were a great option for those avoiding traditional carbohydrates. Some compared their taste to water chestnuts, while others found them similar to artichoke hearts. Despite their benefits, sunchokes never reached the same level of fame as their starchy counterparts. Their knobby, irregular shape made them harder to clean and store, and their high inulin content led to some unfortunate digestive consequences, earning them the nickname fartichokes. As commercial farming focused on crops that were easier to sell, sunchokes faded from mainstream kitchens. It's not winning any beauty contests, but what celeriac lacks in looks, it makes up for in flavor. This knobby, rough-skinned root may not be as recognizable as its leafy cousin celery, but for generations, it was a cold-weather staple, valued for its ability to store well through the harshest winters. Beneath its gnarled exterior, celeriac offers a mild, slightly nutty taste, with the unmistakable essence of celery, making it a versatile addition to soups, stews, and purees. Unlike celery, which was mostly grown for its stalks, celeriac was all about the root. Cooks would peel away the thick skin, revealing a crisp white interior, perfect for roasting, mashing, or slicing into slaws. In France, it was famously used in celeriac remoulade, a simple but elegant salad tossed with mustard and mayonnaise. In colder regions, it was boiled and mashed like potatoes, offering a hearty alternative with fewer carbs. But as modern farming prioritized uniformity and ease of preparation, celeriac fell behind. Its irregular shape made it difficult to peel, and with grocery stores favoring picture-perfect produce, this knobby root was gradually forgotten. In the toughest conditions, when other crops failed, one humble bean thrived. Cowpeas, better known as black-eyed peas, were a survival food, deeply rooted in Southern agriculture and African-American culinary traditions. Drought-resistant and packed with protein, these legumes were a staple, nourishing families for generations. Hardy and fast-growing, cowpeas enriched the soil with nitrogen, making them a favorite among farmers who needed to keep their land fertile. In the kitchen, they were just as valuable. Slow cooked with smoked meats, stewed into hearty dishes, or mixed with rice for the famous Hoppin' John, black-eyed peas were affordable, filling, and full of flavor. During tough times, they stretched meals, proving that a simple bean could be a lifesaver. But as modern diets leaned toward pre-packaged convenience, cowpeas took a back seat. They weren't as flashy as quinoa or as trendy as chickpeas, and as fresh vegetables became more accessible year-round, these humble legumes lost their everyday presence at the dinner table. Yet, in southern kitchens and among those who appreciate true food history, black-eyed peas remain a symbol of resilience, one that reminds us that sometimes the most unassuming foods are the ones that stand the test of time. There was a time when gardens weren't just filled with mild, leafy greens. Some had a bite. Sorrel, a tangy, lemony herb, was once a kitchen staple, adding a burst of acidity long before citrus was widely available. With its sharp, almost sour taste, it was a favorite for soups, sauces, and even simple salads, offering a refreshing contrast to heavier dishes. Unlike many garden greens, sorrel wasn't just for fresh eating. Its tartness intensified when cooked, making it a key ingredient in old-world recipes like French sorrel soup, a silky, velvety dish often finished with cream. In Eastern Europe, it was blended into stews and borscht, giving broths a natural brightness. Pioneers and homesteaders loved it for its resilience. One of the first greens to appear in spring, sorrel provided much-needed vitamins after harsh winters. So why did it fade from American tables? Its bold flavor didn't fit the growing preference for milder greens like spinach and lettuce. Plus, sorrel's high oxalic acid content, while safe in moderation, gave it a reputation for being too strong for everyday meals. Today, it lingers mostly in specialty gardens and gourmet kitchens, waiting for a comeback. Not quite a turnip, not quite a cabbage, rutabaga is the vegetable world's best-kept secret. This hardy root, a cross between the two, was once a staple in American kitchens, especially during the Great Depression and both World Wars. Cheap, filling, and easy to grow, rutabagas were a lifesaver when other crops failed. They stored well through the winter, making them a reliable choice for families who needed food that would last. Cooks often treated them like potatoes, mashing them with butter or roasting them for a caramelized sweetness. In Scandinavian countries, they were turned into Swede mash, a creamy, comforting side dish, while in the US, they found their way into stews, casseroles, and even pasties. Their mild, slightly sweet flavor made them versatile, though their reputation as poverty food didn't do them any favors. As grocery store aisles filled with pre-packaged, ready-to-cook vegetables, rutabagas slowly disappeared from dinner tables. Their rough, wax-coated exterior wasn't as inviting as polished potatoes, and peeling them required a little more effort. Over time, they became a relic of the past, remembered mostly in rural areas and among those who still grow their own food. Before the carrot stole the spotlight, there was another root vegetable filling soup pots and roasting pans across America. Parsnips, with their pale skin and naturally sweet flavor, were once as common as potatoes, valued for their ability to survive the winter and grow in poor soil. Unlike carrots, which were selectively bred to be uniform and mild, parsnips developed a deeper caramel-like sweetness when roasted, making them a favorite in hearty stews and side dishes. In early American kitchens, parsnips were boiled, mashed, or even baked into cakes and breads. Before sugar was widely available, their natural sweetness made them a go-to ingredient for desserts. Farmers loved them for their ability to withstand frost. Cold weather only intensified their flavor, making them an essential crop for families relying on garden produce to last through the season. So why did parsnips fall out of favor? The answer lies in convenience. Carrots, with their smoother texture and faster growing cycle, became the go-to root vegetable, while parsnips, slower to mature and trickier to harvest, were gradually pushed aside. Their irregular shape didn't help either, making them harder to peel and process. Before spinach took over as the leafy green of choice, another plant dominated gardens and wild fields alike. Goosefoot, better known as lamb's quarters, was once a widely cultivated vegetable, packed with vitamins and minerals. For centuries, it was a reliable source of nutrition, thriving in almost any soil and growing faster than most cultivated greens. Rich in iron, calcium, and protein, lamb's quarters was a natural multivitamin, providing nourishment long before grocery store supplements existed. Farmers and home cooks used it much like spinach, steamed, sautéed, or tossed into soups and stews. The tender young leaves had a mild, slightly earthy flavor, making them perfect for fresh salads or even mixed into bread and porridge. Some cultures ground its tiny seeds into flour, using it as a grain substitute. Despite its usefulness, lamb's quarters disappeared from the dinner table as spinach rose in popularity. Spinach was easier to market, had a more uniform appearance, and didn't come with the stigma of being a weed. Over time, what was once a nutritious staple became something people pulled from their gardens instead of harvested. Few vegetables can claim to have fed both people and livestock, but Mangelwurzel did just that. This oversized, rough-skinned beet was once a common sight on farms, valued for its ability to grow in poor soil and provide food through harsh winters. While mainly grown as animal fodder, Mangelwurzel wasn't just for cows and pigs. During tough times, it became an important source of nutrition for families, especially in Europe and early America. When boiled or roasted, its flesh turned tender and slightly sweet, tasting like a cross between a beet and a turnip. Some cooked it in stews, while others mashed it with butter, turning it into a hearty side dish. Even the greens were edible, prepared just like Swiss chard. So why did this giant beet disappear from dinner tables? As farming became more industrialized, Mangelwurzel was pushed aside for more refined crops. Its rough, irregular shape didn't fit the modern produce aisle, and its reputation as animal feed made it less appealing. But for those who still grow it, Mangelwurzel is a reminder of a time when nothing went to waste. A vegetable that could feed a farm, a family, and everything in between. In an era when scurvy was a real threat, fresh greens were a necessity. Miner's lettuce, a wild green packed with vitamin C, became a crucial part of pioneer diets, especially during the gold rush. Its name wasn't just for show. Miners and settlers relied on it to prevent disease when citrus was scarce. Growing abundantly in the wild, it required no cultivation, thriving in cool, shady areas where other crops struggled. Mild in flavor and naturally crisp, miner's lettuce was a refreshing contrast to the heavy, salt-cured foods common at the time. Eaten raw, it made for a simple, nutritious salad. When cooked, it softened quickly, perfect for soups or sautéed greens. Some pioneers even brewed it into tea for medicinal purposes. Its adaptability and health benefits made it a favorite among early American homesteaders. So why isn't miner's lettuce a supermarket staple today? The answer is simple: it didn't need farming. Because it grew wild and self-seeded easily, there was little incentive to cultivate it on a large scale. As commercial agriculture took over, miner's lettuce faded into obscurity. For those who know where to look, it's still there, growing quietly, just as it always has, waiting for someone to rediscover its value. When coffee was scarce, people didn't just give up their morning cup, they got creative. Chicory root, roasted and brewed into a dark, earthy drink, became a go-to coffee substitute during tough times. From the Civil War to the Great Depression, when real coffee was too expensive or simply unavailable, this humble root kept America caffeinated, or at least feeling like it was. Unlike coffee, chicory contained no caffeine, but its roasted, slightly bitter flavor mimicked the real thing surprisingly well. It was a staple in New Orleans, where it became a permanent part of café au lait, blending with real coffee for a smooth, rich taste. Farmers and homesteaders loved chicory not just for its flavor, but for its resilience. It grew where other crops struggled, required little care, and had edible leaves as a bonus. So why did chicory root fade from American cups? Once coffee became widely available again, people eagerly returned to the real deal. Chicory, associated with hard times, was largely forgotten outside the South and a few niche markets. Not every bean stays neatly on the vine. Some like to show off. Yard-long beans, true to their name, could stretch up to 3 feet, dangling like green ropes from their climbing vines. Once a common sight in backyard gardens, these beans weren't just a novelty. They were a practical, high-yield crop that thrived in hot, humid climates where other beans struggled. Unlike traditional green beans, yard-long beans had a more tender texture and a subtly sweet, nutty flavor. Their ability to grow rapidly made them a reliable food source, often picked young for stir-fries, stews, or even sautéed with garlic and oil. In some regions, they were dried and stored for winter, ensuring food security long after the growing season ended. Why did these climbing giants disappear from most American gardens? It wasn't because of taste or nutrition. Yard-long beans are packed with fiber and vitamins. The problem was simple. They didn't fit into modern farming methods. Their lengthy, twisting shape made mechanical harvesting nearly impossible, and their need for trellises required more effort than bush beans. As large-scale agriculture took over, more uniform, easily processed beans took their place. For those who knew where to look, springtime in the Appalachian woods meant one thing: ramps, a wild, pungent cousin of the leek that signaled the end of winter. Unlike their mild supermarket relatives, ramps packed a bold, garlicky punch, their flavor landing somewhere between onions and wild garlic. They were foraged, never farmed, popping up in shady forests where generations of families harvested them for their short but glorious season. Rich in vitamins and minerals, ramps were a much-needed nutritional boost after a long winter with limited fresh produce. Mountain communities sautéed them in bacon grease, folded them into cornbread, or pickled them for later use. In some towns, whole festivals were dedicated to them, celebrating their fleeting presence with feasts of fried potatoes, eggs, and ham, all infused with that unmistakable ramp flavor. So why did ramps nearly vanish? Popularity, ironically enough. As chefs and foodies rediscovered their bold taste, overharvesting took its toll. Unlike onions, ramps grow slowly and don't tolerate mass cultivation. Their increasing demand led to dwindling supplies, making them harder to find outside small, sustainable harvests. Some vegetables need constant replanting. Others take care of themselves. Egyptian walking onions, a hardy, self-propagating perennial, did exactly that. Instead of growing from the ground up like traditional onions, they formed clusters of small bulbs at the tops of their stalks. When the weight became too much, the stalks bent, planting the bulbs into the soil, giving the impression that these onions were walking across the garden. Farmers and homesteaders valued them for their reliability. Unlike standard onions that had to be replanted each season, Egyptian walking onions came back year after year, thriving in poor soil and harsh conditions. Their greens were harvested like scallions, while their underground bulbs were used just like regular onions. The flavor was sharp and pungent, making them ideal for soups, stews, and pickling. Some families even caramelized them for a rich, sweet onion spread. So why aren't they filling produce aisles today? Their irregular, unpredictable growth didn't fit the demands of large-scale farming. Unlike uniform, neatly packaged onions, these had a mind of their own, marching around the garden at their own pace. There was a time when every kitchen garden had a plant that could do it all: lovage, a tall, celery-like herb that added deep, savory flavor to soups, stews, and broths. With a taste somewhere between celery and parsley but with a stronger, almost peppery kick, lovage was once a go-to ingredient before modern celery took its place. Hardy and perennial, lovage was a favorite among homesteaders who appreciated its ability to return year after year. Every part of the plant was useful. The leaves flavored stocks, the seeds were used as a spice, and even the roots were eaten or dried for medicinal purposes. It was believed to aid digestion, freshen breath, and even act as a mild diuretic. Some early American families chewed on the stems like old-fashioned breath mints. So why did lovage disappear from most gardens? Celery became the more familiar, easier-to-market option. Unlike celery's crisp, uniform stalks, lovage grew tall and leafy, making it less appealing for large-scale farming. Over time, its bold, herbal flavor faded from kitchens, replaced by blander, store-bought alternatives. Not all spinach wilts under the summer sun. Malabar spinach, a vining leafy green, thrived where traditional spinach failed, flourishing in hot, humid climates where other greens struggled. Unlike the delicate leaves of conventional spinach, Malabar's thick, glossy foliage held up against heat, making it a favorite in tropical regions and among home gardeners who needed a steady supply of greens through the summer months. Apart from being rich in vitamins A and C, Malabar spinach was very versatile. The leaves, slightly crisp when raw, made a great addition to salads, while their mildly mucilaginous texture turned soups and stews silky when cooked. Popular in Asian and African cuisine, it was often stir-fried with garlic or simmered with coconut milk for a creamy, nutrient-dense dish. So why isn't Malabar spinach a grocery store staple? Its slightly slimy texture when cooked made it an acquired taste, and its climbing habit required trellising, something large-scale farms weren't eager to manage. Over time, milder, easier-to-harvest greens took its place. Malabar spinach remains an invaluable crop, a leafy green that refuses to bow to the heat, offering fresh, vibrant nutrition long after traditional spinach has given up for the season. Few vegetables come with a warning label, but stinging nettle, a wild green packed with nutrients, is one of them. Covered in tiny hair-like spines that deliver a painful sting, it may seem like something best avoided. Yet for centuries, this prickly plant was a staple in kitchens and medicine cabinets alike. Rich in iron, calcium, and vitamins A and C, nettles were a natural superfood long before the term existed. Despite their sting, nettles became tender and safe to eat once cooked. Pioneers and homesteaders boiled them into nutrient-rich soups, brewed them into herbal teas, and even dried them for later use. Their earthy, spinach-like flavor made them a favorite for adding depth to broths and stews, while some adventurous cooks used them in pesto or dumplings. Beyond the kitchen, nettle tea was a trusted remedy for ailments ranging from joint pain to seasonal allergies. So why did nettles fall out of favor? Simply put, convenience. Who wants to handle a vegetable that bites back when modern greens are readily available? As farming became more industrialized, wild foraged foods became less common. At one time, this plant was a dietary staple, feeding civilizations from the Aztecs to early American settlers. Amaranth, also known as pigweed, wasn't just a leafy green. It was a powerful grain, packed with protein, fiber, and essential nutrients. Yet today, most people see it as nothing more than an invasive weed, pulling it from their gardens without realizing they're discarding one of history's most valuable crops. Both the seeds and leaves of amaranth were prized. The grain, once a sacred food in Mesoamerica, was ground into flour, popped like tiny kernels of corn, or boiled into porridge. The leaves, rich in iron and calcium, were cooked like spinach, often sautéed with garlic and oil. Even after European settlers arrived, amaranth remained a reliable food source, thriving in poor soil and resisting drought where other crops failed. Industrial agriculture had no use for its sprawling growth habit, and as wheat and corn took over the grain market, amaranth faded into obscurity. Yet, in some corners of the world, it never left. Today, with a renewed interest in ancient grains, amaranth is making a quiet comeback. For generations, those who knew the land knew that food didn't just grow in fields, it also grew in the water. Cattail shoots, a highly nutritious and versatile wild vegetable, were once a forager's treasure, providing sustenance in times when other food sources were scarce. Nearly every part of the plant was edible, making it one of nature's most generous offerings. The tender white inner shoots, sometimes called Cossack asparagus, were eaten raw in salads or lightly sautéed like leeks. The roots, rich in starch, could be roasted, boiled, or dried and ground into flour, used to thicken soups, or even baked into bread. The pollen, bright yellow and packed with protein, was once mixed into batters for a nutritious boost. Indigenous tribes and early settlers depended on cattails, not just for food but also for practical uses. The leaves were woven into mats, and the fluffy seed heads were used for insulation. As food became more commercialized, wild foraging declined. Grocery stores made cultivated vegetables easier to access, and the idea of pulling dinner from a swampy pond lost its appeal. But for those willing to rediscover the past, cattail remains one of the most versatile wild foods, growing freely, just waiting to be picked. Not all valuable crops grew in tidy rows. Some thrived in the wild, climbing trees and weaving through riverbanks. Ground nuts, Apios americana, a vining legume with protein-rich tubers, once played a crucial role in the diets of indigenous peoples and early settlers. Long before potatoes dominated dinner plates, ground nuts provided a reliable, nutrient-dense food source that grew naturally with little effort. Unlike other tubers, ground nuts were remarkably high in protein, about 3 times more than potatoes. Their rich, nutty flavor made them a favorite in soups and stews, often slow-cooked alongside meats for a hearty, sustaining meal. Some were roasted like chestnuts, while others were dried and ground into flour. In times of food scarcity, this resilient legume offered survival, growing along riverbanks even in poor soil. Unlike uniform, easy-to-harvest crops, ground nuts grew unpredictably underground, making large-scale farming impractical. As potatoes and other staple crops took over, this once revered tuber faded into obscurity. Ground nuts remain an incredible piece of forgotten food history, one that's just waiting to climb back into the spotlight. For generations, families relied on a simple, creamy bean that could stretch a meal and nourish a household. Butter beans, known to many as heirloom lima beans, were once a staple in southern gardens, prized for their rich texture and mild, buttery flavor. Unlike the bland, mass-produced varieties found in grocery stores today, heirloom butter beans came in a range of colors, from deep purple to speckled green, each with its own unique taste. High in protein and fiber, butter beans were a backbone of farm cooking. Slow-simmered with ham hocks, tossed into succotash, or simply seasoned with salt and butter, they provided a hearty, filling meal that didn't break the bank. Their ability to grow in poor soil made them a dependable crop, thriving even when other vegetables struggled. So why did butter beans all but disappear? Industrial agriculture favored faster-growing uniform hybrids that could be canned and shipped easily, pushing out the older, more flavorful varieties. Over time, fresh heirloom butter beans became harder to find, their complexity replaced by the pale, starchy versions most people know today. Favorite. I'm talking about Grandma's cornflake peanut butter cookies. Yeah, this one really was a staple in many Grandma's cookie jars. The crispy cornflakes were the best part of this sweet delight, and don't get me started on peanut butter filling. This cookie was the talk of the town in the 1950s. This recipe became popular due to its simplicity and the fact that it used ingredients many households had on hand. Wasn't Grandma the best at making use of whatever they could find in the kitchen and keeping our tummies full? The recipe was often passed down through generations, becoming a cherished part of family traditions. They were perfect for after-school snacks or family gatherings. Now, if you're ever feeling nostalgic, I've managed to track down this recipe. We'll need peanut butter, cornflakes, sugar, butter, and a few other simple ingredients. The best part? These cookies come together in a snap. To start off, the classic roast beaver tail. Now, I know this one sounds a tad bit unusual right off the bat, but this meaty meal was once a cornerstone of survival for Native Americans and early settlers. Imagine this, trading a juicy steak for a flat, scaly beaver tail. But hey, survival is survival. They said it tasted like pork rinds, so maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounds. Beaver tails were roasted over an open flame until the skin was crisp and the fat underneath rendered down. Beavers were a crucial resource for Native American tribes, and they didn't let any part of the rodent go to waste, not even the tails. Roast beaver tail wasn't just sustenance. It was a delicacy among American Indians and trappers. The best part? It wasn't just finger-licking delicious, but also provided a high-energy meal for those braving the frontier. Let's start the video with a classic, the Johnny Marzetti casserole. If you grew up in Ohio, I'm sure you've had this beef and macaroni casserole. Now, this casserole was named after a real person. Johnny Marzetti was named after the brother of Teresa Marzetti, an Italian immigrant who opened a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio in 1896. This dish was the restaurant's most popular offering and soon became the talk of the town. In the 1950s and 1960s, Johnny Marzetti was a common item on school lunch menus in the Midwest. That's because of its kid-friendly ingredients. The best part about this one was that it could be made in advance and baked just in time for dinner, which means you didn't have to visit Grandma for this one every time. The key to a good Johnny Marzetti was the cheese blend. It was typically made with a combination of cheddar, provolone, and Parmesan cheese. Starting off strong with lard, a long-lasting fat. Oh, lard, the oft-maligned and misunderstood fat that is returning to kitchens where flavor matters. It turns out Grandma did know something we didn't. Lard is a wonder ingredient in the kitchen. In the good old days, before olive oil became trendy and people started eating avocado toast, everyone used little more than lard to make everything from flaky pie crusts to crispy fried chicken. It was so versatile, not to mention that it needed no refrigeration. Unlike butter, need to saute veggies? Use lard. Making biscuits? Lard. Grease a pan? Yep, lard again. Surprisingly, lard from pasture-raised pigs is actually pretty healthy. If kept in a cool, dark spot, lard could last for months, always on hand to add a bit of extra flavor, or a little grease whenever you needed it. Plus, it was super simple to make after a Sunday roast. Just render the fat, pour it into jars, and you had cooking gold ready to go. So, if you ever find yourself craving a little taste of the good old days, grab some lard and embrace your inner granny. Just be careful who you tell. Drop that tidbit at your local Whole Foods, and you might leave a few health nuts speechless. There's nothing quite like a slice of homemade blueberry pie, especially when it's made with Grandma's secret recipe. Yeah, Grandma's classic blueberry pie used to be the life of the party at Thanksgiving. But this dessert wasn't just a seasonal favorite for fall, it was also the star of summer dessert tables and a favorite way to showcase those juicy, plump blueberries. Grandma's version featured a flaky, buttery crust and a filling bursting with blueberries, making it like taking a bite of summer itself. This pie dates back to colonial America, where blueberries were abundant and used in a variety of dishes. The recipe we're talking about today was a hit in Grandma's kitchen, often made from scratch with fresh, local blueberries picked during the height of summer. It's no wonder this pie vanished from many tables. It's not easy to find blueberries at their peak of ripeness these days. Today, it's almost entirely forgotten as chicken has taken over the dinner table. Jellied eels were a staple on the dinner table back in the 1900s. This dish was whipped up in London in the 18th century, when a bored chef decided to mix things up a bit. Here's the thing. Eels were dirt cheap back in the day, so they were everyone's favorite source of meat. The dish consisted of chopped eels boiled in a spiced stock and allowed to cool and set, forming a jelly. It was usually served cold and made a good substitute for dessert. Since it was light on the pockets, the English loved to serve it at dinner parties and festivals. It also made its way out to other parts of Europe such as Denmark and Sweden, which came up with their own versions of the jelly. You won't find a lot of people talking about jellied eels now, because it has largely disappeared from the British menus. Next up, we have the shipwreck casserole. If you think this name's creative, keep watching, because some of these casserole names will leave you scratching your head. So, the shipwreck casserole was a go-to for families during tough economic times because it was simple, budget-friendly, and made with ingredients that were often already on hand. The name shipwreck referred to the hodgepodge of ingredients tossed together as if it were a shipwreck of a meal. Grandma's pantry was almost always stocked, but during the hard times, even she had to make do with whatever was available. This delicious casserole was versatile and typically consisted of ground beef, potatoes, onions, and canned tomatoes, with the occasional addition of baked beans or vegetables like carrots and green beans. Dried beans may sound unattractive, but don't let its unassuming appearance fool you. They are the kings of the pantry. These little guys are the unsung heroes of Grandma's kitchen, and there's always a sack or two hidden somewhere in the back of the pantry. Cheap, nutritious, and can last for many years, dried beans are truly a miracle food. In fact, in difficult times, they often form the backbone of many meals. You can't go wrong with a hearty bean soup or stew. When you want to feed a crowd without breaking the bank, let's face it, Grandma knows how to stretch out a meal. She can turn a pound of beans into a week's worth of dinners, and each nut tastes better than the last. Of course, there is also soak them at night all over it. That sounds tricky in today's fast-paced, microwave-ready world. But in Grandma's time, that was just part of life. You soak the beans and wait. And when they're ready, they're cooked slowly over low heat until they melt deliciously in your mouth. Dry beans also come in all shapes and sizes, such as kidney beans, pinto beans, black beans, etc. Grandma's pantry is basically a bean buffet. It has space for all kinds of soups, stews, and salads. So next time you're walking down the bean aisle, give a nod to these pantry powerhouses. So Grandma's cookbook didn't only come in handy to satisfy the sweet tooth, her casseroles were to die for too, and the ground beef casserole was comfort food at its finest. Remember when this baked goodness was the ultimate weeknight meal? It combined ground beef with vegetables topped with a crispy layer of cheese or breadcrumbs, and if you begged enough, Granny used to go light with the carrots. This casserole was a go-to for busy weeknights and family gatherings alike. The origins of this dish can be traced back to the 1950s, when casseroles became a popular way to feed a crowd on a budget. Grandma's version was particularly beloved for its rich flavor and the way it brought the whole family together around the dinner table. Sadly, it's fallen out of favor, but it's never too late to give Grandma a call and ask her to share that secret recipe. But hey, if you're ever feeling adventurous enough, I say give this one a try. Straight out of the royal family's dinner table, beef Wellington was a beef steak dish with the perfect Regal twist. This delicacy was made of a tender beef fillet coated with pâté and duxelles, then wrapped in puff pastry, which made it just as fancy as it sounds. It was traditionally served with a rich red wine sauce, such as a Madeira or Cabernet Sauvignon reduction. Now, the origin of this meal is shrouded in history, but it is suggested that it emerged in England in the 19th century and was named after the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. This steak required a lot of time and patience, which made it a meal for only the royals of England. It's a part of ancient history now, but you might be able to taste it if you make your way to Regal Balls or a Michelin star restaurant in London. So, tamales are a labor of love, but thanks to Grandma, this tamale pie was a much easier way to enjoy the flavors. This casserole caught on like fire in the early 20th century, particularly in the Southwest, where Mexican influence was strong. Just like most casseroles on the list, this one-dish wonder was also a creation of the Depression era. Some versions of this pie started out as a way to use up leftovers, such as bits of meat, vegetables, and even leftover chili. But hey, no one complained because the end result was a delicious dinner. Many families have an heirloom recipe for this casserole passed down from generation to generation. So if this casserole brings back memories from your childhood, it might be time to give Grandma a call. She could be holding on to a secret recipe that she's finally ready to pass down to you. Homemade pickles. No self-respecting grandma would let a crop of cucumbers go to waste. Enter homemade pickles. Pickles aren't just a way to add zing to a sandwich. They are a way to maintain all of the garden's hard work. When the cucumbers roll up too fast for you to eat, you pickle them, and it's so easy. But pickles aren't just limited to cucumbers, carrots, onions, even nuts can be salted. Ready to be a delicious and crunchy side dish in almost any meal. Pickles have a fun history too. It dates back thousands of years to ancient Mesopotamia. But in Grandma's time, it was all about jars and secret salt recipes passed down from generation to generation. Some pickles are sweet, some types have a sour taste, and some packed a punch that would bring tears to your eyes. It is a science and an art, and Grandma has perfected the pickling process. The best part? Pickles will last forever. Okay? Maybe not forever, but it's close enough. If stored properly, it can be stored for months or even years, ready to add deliciousness to any meal. So, who here remembers the infamous egg yolk cookies? Now, this is a recipe that might surprise you. Egg yolk cookies were a delicate treat that was often overlooked, and Grandma's egg yolk cookies were legendary. They were so light and buttery, they practically melted in your mouth. But let's be honest, they weren't everyone's cup of tea, and the last ones left in Grandma's cookie tin. How these cookies came to life is a good story to tell. Legend has it that these were a result of a sweet accident when someone's granny decided to use up extra egg yolks that were left over from other recipes. This was especially true in times when home bakers were making a lot of custards or puddings. Grandma's egg yolk cookies had a unique flavor and a melt-in-your-mouth texture that set them apart from other cookies. Pressed duck, a French-inspired masterpiece, is just as complex as it sounds. The dish involves cooking a duck and then using a special press to extract the blood and juices, which are then used to create a rich, flavorful sauce. You heard that right? A sauce made out of blood and bone marrow. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, this dish was a showstopper at French restaurants back in the day, and its unique taste spoke for itself. The complex dish was a specialty of Rouen, and its creation was attributed to an innkeeper from the city of Duclair. It's also known as canard à la presse, and is a specialty of the Tour d'Argent restaurant in Paris. Cooking pressed duck isn't a job for the weak and requires special time and effort, which is exactly why it has become a rare dinner time on our tables now. And then, of course, not everyone has a knack for eating a sauce made out of bone marrow. While the southern states were enjoying Tex-Mex cuisine, the northern states were all about Italian flavors, and baked ziti was a staple on the dinner table. Now, even with its Italian roots, you wouldn't typically find this one in Italy. This casserole was created by grandmas who were Italian immigrants to the States and adapted traditional pasta dishes to suit the ingredients available in their new country. Baked ziti was pretty much the long-lost cousin of lasagna, with the classic version including ziti pasta, marinara sauce, ricotta, and mozzarella cheese. The ziti pasta used in the dish was tubular and smooth, which makes it ideal for holding onto the sauce and cheese. This one was a hit at Sunday dinners and had everyone coming back for seconds. Salted pork, also known as the original meat preservation recipe, is the true most valuable player of Grandma's kitchen. Before anyone stares in the refrigerator, people rely on salt to maintain the freshness of their meat, or at least keep it edible. Imagine a time when all that stood between you and rotting meat was a hearty layer of salt. Grandma knew this secret well. She took a good piece of pork and mixed it with salt, and voila! Salted pork was born. The exciting thing about this method is that the salt draws out moisture. This makes bacteria almost unable to grow. It's like having a tiny bouncer at your meat party, ensuring that no unwanted germs spoil the celebration. Salted pork could be thrown into a pot of beans, added to a hearty stew, or simply fried up for breakfast. The options are endless, and Grandma knew them all. In addition, salted pork is a staple food during difficult times. It supported the family when fresh meat was in short supply. As an added bonus, it's versatile and will last for months. Perfect for the long winter months or if you're traveling around the country. Although modern health trends warn against excessive sodium intake, in your grandmother's time, a pinch of salt was the only way to survive. So next time you're eating bacon or ham, think of your grandmother's salted pork heirloom. It is not just a relic from the past, but a delicious reminder of how creativity can lead to delicious solutions. Speaking of strange cookies, who says cookies have to be sweet? Great-grandma's sour cream drop cookies were a delightful surprise. Now, I know sour cream is the last ingredient that comes to mind when you think of cookies, but this unusual addition made our childhoods 1,000 times more delicious. These cookies were a blend of soft and tangy, thanks to the addition of sour cream. Sour cream was a popular ingredient in baking during the early 20th century, adding moisture and a slight tang to cookies and cakes. These must be one of the simplest forms of cookies. As all baking books will tell you, they are also known as drop cookies. They are so called as the cookie dough is so soft that it drops off the spoon and onto the baking sheet. This cookie was often enjoyed with powdered sugar or a glaze to trick kids into thinking they were in for something sweet. These sour cream cookies proved that sometimes the most surprising flavors can be found in the most unexpected places. Before chicken became everyone's favorite pie stuffing, rabbit pie was a favorite on the Easter table. Made out of tender rabbit meal, this savory pie was a household favorite in many rural areas. Rabbit meat is not only rich in flavor, but it's full of nutrients, which made this a healthy choice for many and a staple of the American pioneers. Plus, Rabbit meat didn't cost a fortune like most meat back in the day and was widely available. Along with rabbit meat, ingredients of the filling of a rabbit pie typically included onions, celery, and carrots. Some English variations included prunes, bacon, and cider, while the Australians sometimes included the food paste Vegemite. Rabbits aren't as common as they were back then, so rabbit pie has vanished from our tables and Easter traditions. You know what? All good things come to an end. Remember when Campbell's cream of mushroom soup and canned tuna were the stars of the food aisle back in the day? Well, Grandma took those humble ingredients and spun them into her classic tuna noodle casserole. During the 1950s and 1960s, convenience foods were all the rage, and tuna noodle casserole fit the bill perfectly. It was a post-World War II creation and was whipped up in no time with ingredients already on hand. Plus, it was a classic comfort food that brought everyone together at Graham's dinner table. During the mid-20th century, tuna noodle casserole was a mainstay in American cookbooks and cooking magazines. It was often featured in advertisements and was promoted as a quick and easy dish for the busy homemaker. This one fell out of flavor, but thanks to the recent revival of noodle dishes, we might see this one back on the menu soon. In the meantime, why not dust off Grandma's old cookbooks and bring it back yourself? Sourdough starter is a magical concoction that turns easy ingredients into fluffy, delicious bread. It was a staple in Grandma's pantry long before gluten unfastened was even a factor. This ancient tradition goes back hundreds of years, proving that while the era has advanced, our love for an awesome loaf of bread hasn't changed a chunk. The best part? That sourdough starter can live forever. With a bit of care, it can outlive Grandma herself. Just consider it. A little jar of gooey goodness bubbling away, equipped to convert any dough right into a crusty masterpiece. Sourdough is a real multitasker in the kitchen. You could make the whole lot from classic loaves to pancakes, waffles, or even pizza crust with that starter. And don't even get me started on the flavor. It has a unique tanginess that normal bread just can't compete with. Plus, some say that the wild yeast found in sourdough can be easier on your digestive system. It's like a pleasant little bacteria party to your gut. But be cautious. If you forget about your starter, it will develop into a science experiment gone wrong. No one wants to create a brand new breed of kitchen mold. So, next time you tear right into a warm slice of sourdough, don't forget Grandma's old jar of starter, bubbling away like a wizard's potion, bringing comfort and pleasure with every bite. Moving on, let's talk about Grandma's shoe fly pie. Rings a bell? This Pennsylvania Dutch classic was a true taste of Americana. Grandma's shoe fly pie was a staple at family picnics back in the day. It was a pie that was both comforting and unique, with a flavor profile that was hard to forget. The secret to a great shoe fly pie was the molasses filling. It was a rich, sticky mixture of molasses, brown sugar, and spices. Shoe fly pie made a lot of buzz in the 19th century, with its name supposedly coming from the need to shoo away flies from the sweet molasses filling. Grandma's version of this pie was the highlight of the dinner table during the holidays and was often served with a cup of coffee. The best part? While this pie might sound intimidating, it was actually quite easy to make. The filling comes together in minutes, and the crumb topping is a breeze. Take it as a sign to whip this up and take it to your next potluck. Everyone's going to thank you. Now, the French weren't fans of the rabbit pie, so they decided to whip up a pigeon pie instead. This delicacy dates all the way back to the 17th century when James Hart, a Scottish physician, wrote in 1633 that pigeon pies were usually served with far too much pepper. It became an instant hit after Hart's paper, and people started cutting down on the pepper a bit. This crispy dish was a savory game pie made of pigeon meat and various other ingredients traditional to French cuisine. The buttery crust made it a luxurious treat which was common on banquet tables. It was a tradition for wives to make pigeon pie after their husbands spent long days hunting for the delicious bird. But hey, tastes change, and so do our feathered friends. Ever wondered what the ultimate American comfort food was back in the day? Well, the only right answer is the veal and ham pie. This hearty pie combined the delicate flavors of veal with the salty goodness of ham. The pie's popularity surged during the Victorian era, It originated in the kitchens of English settlers and was a practical choice for using up leftovers, but soon became a meal for the elite. While it was a luxurious delicacy in England, it was a staple in large households in America. Not only was it easy to whip up, but was also cheap to make, which made it perfect for communal gatherings and large families. Cheese and potatoes are like a match made in heaven, and Grandma's cheesy, scalloped potatoes was straight out of any cheese lover's dream. So this casserole tastes even better than it looked, and let me tell you, it looked finger-licking delicious. The term scalloped comes from the French word escalope, which originally referred to thin slices of meat. However, in the case of scalloped potatoes, it refers to the thinly sliced potatoes used in the dish. Many grandmas used old-fashioned methods to make their cheesy, scalloped potatoes, including hand-slicing the potatoes thinly, layering them with love, and cooking them slowly. Some even added secret ingredients they swear by, like a dash of nutmeg, a hint of garlic, or even a sprinkle of paprika for added flavor. The best part about this one was its crispy crust, and I'm sure you remember fighting all your siblings for the bigger chunk of it. This dish wasn't only tasty, but was also practical. It was a one-pot wonder, meaning it could be cooked and served in the same dish, making cleanup a breeze. I'm sure Grandma loved that. Canned vegetables were the silent workers of Granny's kitchen. Those beautiful inventions offered the hint of a summer in Granny's pantry, although it was buried in snow. Think for a moment that you entered her kitchen and saw those shiny jars standing as soldiers, always giving you the taste of comfort in your mouth. Canning the vegetables wasn't just about preserving the harvest. It was, to a certain extent, a survival technique in a world where a grocery store was not a day's ride away. For the green beans or the tomatoes, for instance, Grandma would always ensure that she picked the freshest from her farm and prepared them in the most appropriate way. If they are your favorite vegetables or fruits, it's like preserving them in time. If you close the lid well, you are going to be eating the produce of the summer, even in winter. Did you know that the art of canning dates back to the early 19th century? It was developed as a means through which people could acquire food during wartime. Boy, that operation was something like a military strategy. And now, we can enjoy that same convenience in our homes. Canned veggies are perfect for making soups, casseroles, and even as a side dish. No cooking required. Simply heat the meal and you're set to start your delicious eating spree. This list wouldn't be complete without Grandma's baking powder biscuits. There's nothing quite like the smell of freshly baked biscuits, and Grandma's baking powder biscuits were better than those from any bakery. They were fluffy and buttery and disappeared in seconds. And since they were made with baking powder, these biscuits were a quick and easy way to get fresh homemade bread on the table. This cookie was more than Grandma's making something good out of the top of their heads. It was science. Buttermilk was the secret ingredient for tender biscuits. It reacted with the baking powder to create air pockets, giving the biscuits their rise. The recipe for these biscuits likely dates back to the late 19th century when baking powder became widely available and revolutionized home baking. These ones were best served with some homemade jam straight from Grandma's fridge. Ah, don't we all miss it? If you want to give your grandparents a rush of nostalgia, ask them about this meaty goodness, and who knows, your grandma might even dust off some cookbooks. Squirrel stew might sound unusual today, but it was a popular dish in rural areas. Yep, our bushy-tailed friends were once a common ingredient in many kitchens. Also known as Brunswick stew, it was a tomato-based stew generally involving local beans, vegetables, and originally small game meat such as squirrel. However, many variations from around the world used rabbit meat too. The origin of this meaty stew is controversial at best, as the states of Virginia and Georgia both claim its birth, with Brunswick County in Virginia and the city of Brunswick in Georgia claiming it was developed there. To keep things peaceful, let's just say Virginia and Georgia both played a role in creating this delicious stew. Squirrel meat was easily hunted and provided a necessary source of protein. With the rise of chicken, squirrel stew has fallen out of flavor. But hey, this one is pretty easy to whip up and will satisfy your Thursday night meat cravings like no other. So squash might not be our top pick on a regular day, but Grandma's squash casserole was so irresistible that we found ourselves going back for seconds, or even thirds. This casserole was a staple in Southern cuisine and was Graham's favorite way of sneaking nutrients into our dinner. Squash is rich in vitamins A and C, potassium and fiber, making it a wholesome choice. Now, this dish was typically famous in the summer when squash was available in abundance, but you could freeze the veggie and enjoy it all year round too. Squash casserole was highly customizable, meaning Graham could tweak it by adding cooked bacon, sausage, or even fresh herbs. The secret ingredient that gave this bad boy its unique taste was a dash of hot sauce, so next time you attempt making this dish for a potluck, don't forget the key ingredient. Thank me later! Homemade vinegar was the magical elixir lurking in Grandma's pantry, the secret ingredient for everything, from tangy pickles to household cleaning. For most people, vinegar is a simple ingredient that is placed on the table as a condiment. This fermented concoction was the functional kitchen multi-tool that could and would do it all. Making vinegar at home is kind of an experiment. Taking some kind of fruit juice, say apple or grape, adding sugar into it and letting Mother Nature do the rest of her magic. Grandma would use it in her pickling adventures, ensuring those cucumbers were brined to perfection, ready to become a crunchy side dish. Why spend your hard-earned money on store-bought when you have fresh homemade food in a jar? But vinegar wasn't just for the kitchen. Oh no! Grandma would use it to clean surfaces, remove stains, and even freshen the laundry. Just imagine the confusion when people realized that the sour-smelling liquid could also work wonders around the house. Besides, homemade vinegar is organically better than its commercial counterparts, packed with probiotics and beneficial bacteria. So, next time you reach for a bottle of vinegar, remember that Grandma wasn't just a kitchen magician. She was a pioneer of practical living, turning something as simple as fermented fruit juice into a pantry staple that helped her cook, clean, and preserve all in one fell swoop. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and let us know if you ever tried any of these forgotten veggies.